There's this paradox going on over here around confidence. We tell you to be confident, but don't be too confident. We
Mm.
tell you to lead, but don't lead like that. We tell you to be visible, but don't promote yourself.
Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40 plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up to date information on how to live well, as well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. A big welcome to episode 111 of the Redefining Midlife podcast. I'm really so glad you've chosen to spend this time with me today because you are about to hear an incredibly powerful conversation with award-winning founder, author, and esteemed speaker, Megan Dalla-Camina. Megan is a globally celebrated expert in women's leadership and empowerment. With decades of experience as a Fortune 500 executive and deep academic credentials, she brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. She's a visionary founder and CEO of the award-winning Women Rising Leadership Program, which has empowered thousands of women and male allies across more than 60 countries to lead with confidence and to thrive. Her transformative work has been featured in major media outlets around the world, and it's such a privilege to have Megan on the Redefining Midlife podcast. In today's episode, Megan shares her personal and leadership journey, how she navigated male-dominated workplace, battling burnout, and how these experiences fueled her passion for helping other women to rise. We also dive into some of the powerful themes from her best-selling new book, Women Rising, which I highly recommend. Now, this is a conversation that every woman, no matter her age or stage in life, needs to hear. So be sure to share this episode far and wide. Now, without further ado, let's begin. I am so looking forward to our conversation today, Megan. So welcome to the Redefining Midlife podcast.
Thanks, Joe. I'm so excited for our conversation too. Can't wait to get into it.
There's lots to talk about. And as everyone would have heard in the intro, you are an incredibly accomplished and successful woman. So you wear many hats. You've had many accomplishments, including award-winning CEO, speaker, author, B&T Women Leading Tech Woman of the Year and Mentor of the Year. Your work has helped thousands of women worldwide, and you help them to thrive and to lead confidently. And now you've got a brand new best-selling book called Women Rising. And we're going to talk about that and delve into the content of that a little bit later in the episode. But before we do, Megan, I'm really curious to know about how you became such a powerhouse, because it's something that doesn't just happen overnight. So what were your younger years like as you were growing up?
My younger years, look, nothing like this. So I grew up as an actress and as a dancer. So from three, pretty much until 23, that was my path. And I always thought I was going to end up in LA and I was going to end up, all I ever wanted to do was be an actress.
Mm.
So I spent my whole childhood, in theater productions and, doing all the things on stage dancing until I had a crossroads at 23, which took me into, of all things, the corporate world. And I was like a rebel at school. I tried to get kicked out of school. I used to get suspended, and my dad would go and talk the headmaster into not letting me get kicked out. Yeah, like I was on a real different path to what eventuated after I hit corporate. So yeah, fascinating. Just
It is
so
fascinating. I was not expecting you to say something like that about, mucking up at school. I would have thought, and because you've done so much work and so much study, and you're still
yes.
studying now, that you would have been a
Yes.
studious, ticking all the boxes. Love it.
No, I was one of those children. If she only applied herself, she could be insert, right?
Yeah.
Smart and all the things. She talks too much. Yeah, like the complete antithesis from 2 master's degrees, PhD, my love of learning. Yeah.
Amazing.
Just goes
Amazing.
to show, right? It's never too late
No,
to
it's never
find your
too late.
path.
So
Yeah.
what do you think some of that earlier start in your life has led you to where you are now? What are some of those key things that, that you got from that and led you along this path?
I think one of the really important ones is around creativity.
Mm.
And when I look back at, being a dancer and an actress and I was a songwriter and I was a singer in bands, when you look at really, and I was writing songs at like 8 years old, you look at the crux of all of that, the through line is creation, creativity, expression. And that's certainly what I do now. I mean, I do, there's a whole mix of things that fit into that fusion, but this sense of creativity, the freedom that comes from creativity as well.
Mm.
Freedom is one of my core values, always has been, and that's that rebellious, don't pin me down side. So yeah, I think that certainly is, I think, the driving force that's carried through from childhood.
Well, that's so interesting. So at 23, what was that the catalyst that got you on away from that creative start that you had earlier in life to the road that you ended up taking?
Yeah, so I had a couple of things happened in my early 20s that shifted my course.
Mm.
I got chronic fatigue when I was 21, and back then, like I'm 54 now, so back then, no one knew what chronic fatigue was. I was really ill, like I was in bed for 6 months doing all of the, doctors and alternative therapists and herbalists trying to figure out what was wrong with me. So that was a very defining period of my life. And then at 24, I had a car accident. And it wasn't a bad car accident. Like it didn't look like a bad car accident, but I really hurt my back. And I had another 6 months of, like rehab type things, hydrotherapy, and I wasn't working because I was trying to get my back better. And as I came out of that period, that was when I was at this crossroads of, okay, do I go back to acting and throw myself in and go to NIDA and, do the whole thing? I was engaged, and that's a whole nother story. Or do I go get a real job and see what that path is? And I kind of handed it over to the universe. I didn't realize back then that's what I was doing. But I was like, just put me where I'm meant to be and guide this path. And a couple of days later, I went for a job interview at GE and I thought, oh, GE, it's going to be light bulbs and, dishwashers. And I got the job and it was their electronic commerce business. And I started there in a 20 hours a week admin role because that's, really all I could do, with my back still recovering. And that was the start of my love affair that I had with working in corporate.
Mm.
Yeah, which was a love affair until it wasn't, but it was a love affair for a long time.
Yeah, right. And so that you started corporate without having like the traditional degree to get you into the corporate world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
many
that
of
was
them, I
sort
guess,
of
have
that
done.
admin, yeah, that admin path. Because
Yes.
I had admin experience. I'd done a lot of sort of officey work,
Yeah.
part-time for a lot of years. So, that was a really good entry point. And a couple of months after I started, I shifted around a bit and then ended up in marketing.
Huh.
So, and that was when I was really like, this is what I'm meant to do, and did that
Yes.
for a very long time.
So you mentioned you listened basically to your intuition, the greater universe, what's going to be out there for me, and followed that. Is that something that you still do to this day and strongly work with?
I do, absolutely. That sense of tapping into something bigger
Mm.
and being really guided by and trusting in that sense of knowing that we get as we all get it, but particularly as women when we're really dialed in. And I have a very deep spiritual practice, personal practice that I have had for a very long time. And over time, just honing in on the listening and the guidance and what is in alignment and what feels purposeful and trusting that path. And I did that back then. I didn't know that that was what I was doing. It was more like put the opportunity in front of me and I'll take it. Like I'll be guided by what comes. But yeah, it's absolutely a huge part of
Mm.
my life, my work, how I make decisions.
Mm.
Yeah.
And through that business of those years, did you find that you at times weren't perhaps listening to that inner voice, that inner guidance as much as you should have been?
Oh, for a very long time.
Yeah.
And something happened to me when I really got into the full flight of my corporate career, where the creativity, the intuition, that sense of knowingness, it all disappeared.
Mm.
Probably a better way to say it was it all got suppressed. Because I think, as so many of us experience when we go into, these big jobs and in whatever type of organization it is, we morph ourselves into what's expected of us, and particularly as women. And, I went into very unhealthy patterns very early around, working 18 hours a day. And I was managing a team across Asia. And I was 3 weeks out in Asia or the US, 1 week back in Australia. I
Mm.
was newly married, trying to manage all of these things. And you like get on that survival treadmill. And I also loved it. Like I loved having 13 countries that I was, looking after. And I'm in India and then Tokyo, and I loved it, but I also lost myself in all of that. That took me more than a decade to have my burnout moment and go, oh, okay, this this isn't all that I thought it was.
Yeah. So it took that burnout moment for you to go, right, something has to change.
I think I had many, many burnouts.
Hmm.
There were lots of different moments. I remember this moment so clearly. I reckon I was 28. And I was in Hong Kong. I'd been living in Hong Kong when I was still at GE, had just been working on a massive big project. And I remember being in the shower in the morning and I was so sick, I could hardly function. I remember just going, okay, come on, go to work. So I remember these, and like now looking back, I think, oh my God, why did you do that? But this is how we're trained. This is how we're cultivated. This is what's expected. So there were a lot of those moments, getting, I was pregnant. I was married and fell pregnant when I was 30. I'd just been made director at PwC on the Thursday. On the Friday, I started my first master's degree. And on the Saturday, I found out I was pregnant.
Mm.
And then 18 months later, I got divorced. So there was a whole nother wave of, mini burnouts and challenges and health challenges. But it really took me all the way to 36 to hit the wall. So it really hit the wall in a way that, like, there is no backing away from this. We have to go around and find a different path, which is what I
Mhm.
did.
Yeah. I bet Megan of this age, 54 you said you were, 54-year-old
54.
Megan,
Yeah.
love just to cuddle the younger Megan and just give her some, whisper some sound advice in her ear.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I look at the younger women in my community. And I look at the women of my age who say, they come through the Women Rising program or they're reading my book or whatever, and they're like, oh, if only I'd had these tools
Mm.
back then in my 20s, in my 30s. And like, I don't regret that I didn't, because I wouldn't be here doing this work, of
Right.
course, because this is the path that I was placed on for a very intentional purpose. But I have such compassion for her. We're so hard on ourselves, and I used to drive myself so hard.
Mm.
And I just don't want that for women. Like I just don't. It's like we all need to wake up and get the tools and the support and the self-compassion so we don't do that to ourselves, because it is just derailing, completely derailing.
It certainly is. And I think a lot of women who are listening now who are going through, usually in midlife, you've got so many transitions, multiple
Yeah.
transitions happening at once, can really identify with a lot of what you've just said there. And
Yeah.
and even in your book, it comes with almost like a little toolkit of
Yeah.
what sort of things that you can do to nurture yourself, to questions to ask, practices to start to implement. So yeah, it's really something that I think as women we do need to take stock and also be there for the younger women and be more vocal with it. But
It's also interesting amongst the women that you maybe work with as well, but I just know with my own daughter, there is more self-awareness now of these sorts of things. Whether or not they implement what they know is another thing, but
Yes.
there is more of an awareness.
Yeah. I find it's quite mixed.
Okay.
So I find that there are of course it's going to be mixed, right? Like there are some younger women that I come across that they are like this. I'm like, how did you become that aware at 28 years old? Where does that come from? Because I certainly wasn't. But then I also see, particularly in workplaces, just thousands and thousands and thousands of women who are going through exactly what I went through.
Mm.
And until they come to do the work, they're like, oh, I didn't know this could be different. I thought this was just the way it is. And
Mm.
it's like, no, 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 we can create something better than that, for you, because we know so much,
Yes.
like we've been on this path now, and here are the tools. So let's do that.
Yep. So your new book, Women Rising, really is a seminal piece of work. Like it
Thank you.
ticks so many boxes. And I remember reading Naomi Wolf's Beauty Myth in my early 20s, and that book opened my eyes up to so many different things and different ways of thinking, and just that whole concept of what society is telling us and what boxes that we've been put in. And I'm reading your book now as a woman in my 50s, and it actually feels almost like the same. Reading that, the same feelings that I got back then is what I experienced when
Wow.
I was reading that. So it really, congratulations. It is a marvelous book, and it's also really practical because as I said before, there's lots of questions in there. There's toolkits that women can resource and find and access. And that's fairly rare. Often it's a book of just explaining something and then that's it. You choose your own adventure then on finding out more information. But you've been able to somehow put it all together in a one-stop shop with three parts. And we'll talk about the three different parts coming up shortly. But how did you get the idea of putting that together?
Thank you so much for saying that. Like I really received that. Because it feels like a seminal work for
Mm.
me, like 20 years of work. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm gonna cry.
Oh.
Um, I feel seen. Um, yeah, it's really interesting because I really grappled with the writing of this book. And it was many other books before it was this book. And I also waited quite a long time. Like my third book was 2019. But I knew the next book I wanted it to be around this topic because it's my core work. And I waited and I waited and I was waiting to get that sense, that intuition, that feeling, and that knowing that now's the time. Like we're in the zeitgeist, now's the time. And last year, when I was really crafting it, it was going to be a really small book. It was going to be the first section, like a manifesto.
Mhm.
And as I was writing it, being a teacher and a coach, you would understand this. I was like, I can't just put out all of these problems and all of these paradoxes of power and then say, okay, well, good luck with that. I had to go through the whole journey, and we understand the external, we understand the internal, here are the tools. So that's how it became these three very distinct sections, because I really believe they are the three core components that all of us as women and also our allies and all leaders need to truly understand. And that when we do, we will finally start to shift. Because certainly in the first section of the book around, the patriarchy, which we never talk about, these power paradoxes and how they impact women. No, we don't know. Like we don't talk about these things. We don't understand them. And we keep talking about the same things when it comes to women's success and particularly women's leadership, and scratch our heads going, why aren't we there? Well, this is why.
Mm.
Like to me, it's just so clear, particularly after doing all of the research. And, I work with more than 700 organizations around the world. Like I see the inside and I see what's happening with the women. So it was really important for me to put those pieces together in a way that I hope makes people go, oh, I didn't see it like that. But now that I see it, it makes so much sense. And then, okay, and now here's what we go do, and we can go do that together. So yeah, that's my heartfelt hope for this book.
Well, I think you've succeeded. No, not think. I know you've succeeded because it, yeah, it's eye-opening, yet it is empowering as well in the same place. And you can read, and we'll talk about the second part where you can discover your own particular voice. But yeah, it just gives you those practical tools to work through to make yourself, to really develop who you are as a person, which
Yes.
really that's our ultimate job while we can live and breathe.
Well, yeah.
That's exactly.
Yes. And to also like that first section to understand, because the thing I hear from women every single day is, and I write about it in the book, I thought it was just me. Like I think I'm the only woman who struggles with the things that I struggle with, whether that's confidence or being authentic as a leader or my well-being, or like all of the pieces. And we also think it's our fault. We think it's our fault when we are struggling with confidence. We don't understand, well, there's this paradox going on over here around confidence. We tell you to be confident, but don't be too confident. We tell you to lead, but don't lead like that. We tell you to be visible, but don't promote yourself, and be empowered, but in a system that disempowers you. And I think it's so important that women understand that there's this whole fabric of society and patriarchy that's impacting your inner critic and your imposter syndrome and all of the pieces that we go through, so that we are empowered to see that there are forces over here that impact everything about how you live your life. And we may not be able to change all of this over here about the system, but we can absolutely change how we show up in it.
Yes. And that is empowering for women to hear and to
And that's empowering.
Absolutely, it is. And you talk about the 6 paradoxes, and you mention a number of them then. The empowerment paradox, be empowered in a system that disempowers you, but in a system that disempowers you. The confidence paradox, be confident, but not too confident. The motherhood paradox, be a great mother, but work like you don't have children. That's one I know a lot of women resonate with. The success paradox, be successful, but in a sea of expectations. The leadership paradox, be a leader, but not like that. And the visibility paradox, be visible, but don't promote yourself. Now, a lot of the time that you were speaking about patriarchy, and throughout the book, you talk about patriarchy. And you said it's not a term that we often use and we don't talk about it much. So can we have that common language? Can you just explain to the listeners now exactly when you say patriarchy, what are you talking about and what does that mean?
Yes. So at its most simple level, the patriarchy is systems that were set up by men for men to succeed in. Like that, I always try and simplify things down to what's the lowest piece of that? And that's what it is. And that doesn't mean that it's men's fault. And that doesn't also mean that men always thrive in a patriarchal system, which we live in. The world is a patriarchal construct. But it does mean that we as women need to really understand that. Because when we do, you just start to look at the world so differently. And then we get to ask the question, well, how do I want to show up in that? If that's true, which it is, like I think it's irrefutable, then what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my choices? What does that mean for the systemic biases that exist in the system? And what do I want to do? And how do I want to navigate through that? And what I do a lot of work with male allies. And what I find is when we start to have this conversation with men and conversations about patriarchy and power and privilege and theirs, they start to go, oh, I'd never thought about it. And they start to see the world differently. And that's when we start to get some traction.
Mm. And do you find there's much opposition from men when you start to talk about these things? I assume there's a range. There'd be probably from those who are very defensive to those who are very open. What do you, when you're talking with men, what are you finding in particular?
Yes, it is absolutely a range. And I think if you really want to get a sense for patriarchy and misogyny that women experience in the world, just go onto any social media platform and go look at any feminist-ish posts. They could be about women in the workplace, they could be, feminism in society. Go look at the political race in the US and just go read the comments, and you just see the whole thing. So it's absolutely a range. So I put that on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, I would put like the men who are like, they're open and they're ready. They know what they don't know and they're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, tell me what I need to know. And not only that, but they also then want to activate the other men. And that's the best of it. That's when men truly start to understand, I thought I was a male ally. I'm not. I'm a good guy with good intentions, but I'm not active. I'm not an advocate. And they start to make that shift. And then I was on a call this morning with 50 men in our Male Allies program, and it was our last call. And a whole bunch of them are like, okay, so my next step is I'm going to go and activate the men. I'm going to get the men into the program. We're going to talk about the book. What are the things that I can do to call them in to this work? So it is a full spectrum and everything in between. But I hold out so much hope for those conversations with the men, sort of that top third, who are open and really ready to do the work. Yeah. And we focus on them and we try and pull the other men along as we go.
Yeah, well, and that's what you need to do, don't you? But you'll get more buy-in when it comes, I imagine, if it comes from other men as well. It's easier for those who are more resistant. If they hear it from another man,
Yes.
they're more likely to go along. What's the age range, just out of interest sake, Megan, of the men who are more open? Is it a range of ages, or is it the younger men who seem to be more open?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I see it in the young men. I've got a 23-year-old, nearly 24-year-old son, and he's like, fully fledged. Like, they just get it. Like, I look at him and his friend group, some of which are older than him, into that sort of, 26, 28, and they're so dialed in on this topic. They want equality for everybody. They really are very progressed and progressive. At the same time, a lot of the men who I work with through the Male Allies program, they're in their 40s, they're in their 50s. They're the ones that we may think are too baked in, but they're also the men who have wives, they have daughters, and they need that light switched on,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just for what happens at work. And I think certainly in Australia, the conversation that we're having about domestic violence, I find with a lot of men, you just got to find the right entry point. And a lot of the times that's not work. Like, that's not what happens in the workplace. It's what happens in the home, it's what happens in society. And then they go, oh, okay. So yeah, like I think that change is available to all of us. We just got to be open and we got to find the right lever. And for the men, we also have to make it not us against them and divisive. And that's what I try and do in our work. Like, I'm not calling them out, I'm calling them in. This is the work. When we create a better work and workplace for women, we create a better workplace for everybody, you included. So it's not women are going to win, men are going to lose. It's women are going to win and all tides will rise.
Yeah.
And it's just that shift in perspective, because there is a lot of resistance out there. There is a lot of resistance from men of the women are getting my jobs and the women this and the women this and the women this, and I'm losing. And we have to shift that conversation as well, because the data just doesn't support that. But I can completely understand why some men would feel that. They would feel, oh, the women are getting the jobs and I'm going to miss out.
Yeah.
There's conversation changes that big ones that we need to shift.
And I do love that when you just said, I'm not calling them out, I'm calling them in. That's a really powerful statement. And when they hear that as well,
Yeah,
when more men hear that, they will then be a lot more accepting and open rather than seeing
yes,
the blame game. We're not blaming people, but this is what it is. And we need to work within, the constraints that we have. So
yeah.
can you tell me what the common threads between the various paradoxes? What are you seeing although they're all, the six that are very distinct,
Yeah.
yet what are the threads that are in common?
So the threads they're all baked in this patriarchal society and construct and system that we live in, that they all have their own nuances around gender norms, gender normative behavior that is expected of women and girls. They all have an intersectional lens, which was really important to me in the book to pull that through and pull that out because I work with such an intersectional community. And of course, we're not a monolithic group as women. We're so varied and so different. And, the threads around like, what is the impact of this? What is the impact of the gendered construct of leadership and that an ideal leader looks like this and women don't fit? So we're always trying to shapeshift ourselves. And, that imposter syndrome, which really is imposter system in so many ways, because it wasn't built for us.
Yeah.
We don't, we've never belonged there. And it hasn't changed that much either. So each one of them has their own, of course, all of the different elements that we go through, but this thread of patriarchy, gendered expectations, gender norms, and the social construction of how we are meant to be as women in all of these different areas of our lives.
Can you see a day when these paradoxes aren't going to be as entrenched, or is that just a pie in the sky dream?
I do. Like I'm an eternal optimist. I'm also a researcher and a pragmatist. But the UN tells us it's going to be 300 years until we get to gender parity globally across all of the aspects. Like we have a massive amount of work to do, of course, stating the obvious. But the thing that I try not to get frustrated. I try and, use the positive energy. But the thing I do get frustrated with is you look at the conversation that happens every time someone publishes some data. The Lean and McKinsey report just came out last week. The chief executive women data came, we're regressing, and da, da, da. And then what happens? We talk about the same things. We're just having the same conversation over and over and over again. And then we wonder why, where are the women? So, I think that there's some key elements to this. This paradox conversation is one of them. The where are the men and what are they doing is another one. And the how are we empowering the women? Like that's my Venn diagram. How are we truly empowering the women? Not just saying be more confident. We don't need to hear that. We need to understand the landscape, and then we need women to have the tools, men to be the allies, and for us to really truly understand the system that we're working in, and for enough people to say that's not okay anymore, because we skirt around the issues. We just talk about the same things. That's what I get frustrated with. Like, new conversation, please.
Yes.
And a real conversation, not just I'm going to tick that box. I'm with D&I. Yeah, we're doing that. You're not the way that it needs to be done.
How does that happen? Like, how do we get that to happen? Does it come from the private sector? Does it come from government? Does it come from both? Like, where do we get to really have that conversation shift?
It's such a good question, and I don't have a pithy answer,
Yeah.
right? Again, I'm a realist. I think the answer is that it has to come from both. It's got to come from public sector. It's got to come from private sector. We know that capitalism drives the world, and capitalism is the private sector, right? So, and I don't know what the current stat is, but the vast majority of people employed in the world, I think, work in some form of an organizational structure, some form of capitalist structure. I think that stands to reason. So I think organizations have a lot of work to do, and it's hard work. So, like, I don't say that, lightly, about shifting the dynamics. And when we shift things in workplaces for people, we can shift them in our homes, of course, and then we can shift them more broadly in society and communities. So I think it has to be both, but we also have to get under the policies.
Mm.
I always, in the work that we're doing, especially when we talk about the men, I'm like, it's fine for the CEO to say, we're male allies and we're champions and we're doing all of this. Good, tick. We need that. But change happens in the middle. It doesn't happen at the top. CEO can say whatever they like. Change happens with these middle managers who are still mostly men in most organizations. That's where we get change. That's why I'm so passionate about this male allies conversation. I mean, my work in life is to support women, but we've got to do this work with the men.
Yeah.
And I think the more we do that, we will start to really see the shift. One of the data points that really concerned me in the Lean In report that came out last week is only 1 in 10 men see microaggressions against women at work, which means the men don't see it.
Yeah.
The men don't see the problem. So how do you shift everything that we're talking about for women if the men don't see that there's a problem? And yet no one's talking about it, right? So yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but it has to be both. But the organizations, they have such responsibility, not just for what happens in their company, but the ripple effect of how that then impacts society and family. And, we see these mandates of everyone back to the office. Everyone, blanket rule, everyone back to the office. Like, think about the flow-on effect of that, not just for women, but for children, for families, for aging parents, for the infrastructure of community.
Mm.
Yeah, organizations have so much power.
Yeah, yeah.
It
is complex. Yeah. It is absolutely complex. And thank you for answering that. And yeah, it's more food for thought. So for those people who are in middle management to see just how important that particular level of management is in helping to solve or to at least address some of these issues that we're talking about today. Now, Megan, in the second part of the book, you explore the concept of the stories that keep us stuck. So this part really resonated with me in particular from what I've gone through personally, but also with the women that I talk to and the women that I work with in my mentoring and coaching work. So not only do we have to contend with that outside world, but we also have to listen to those incessant voices that we've got in our head, the stories we tell ourselves, all of our internalized beliefs. And at this stage of life that we're in now, they've had a bloody lot of airtime to be, they've run rampant. And they can really hold us back from creating an incredible second half of life if we let them. I love how you talk about the tyranny of shoulds, and I'm putting my finger around the word shoulds, the illusion of musts, and the struggle with the have-tos. And I love to call those the myths of prerequisites. So it's those stories we tell ourselves, that inner critic, they're the dream stealers. They're the things that really hold us back, and the brake pedals. So can you talk about those three a little bit further so women know what we're talking about when we're saying the must-haves and the have-tos and so forth, as it relates to women in particular in this stage of life?
Oh gosh, yes. So I write about this. The second half of the book's all about the inner critic, as you know, and I started off with looking at the inner patriarch, which again is something we very rarely talk about. It took me a long time to figure out that there's that external patriarchy, the systems in which we live, but we as women particularly take all of that and then we internalize it. And a lot of that turns into the voice in our head telling us what we can do, what we can't do. and turns into our archetypes, which, we break down, as you know, the 13 archetypes of the inner critic, so that we can really start to understand it better. And as I was writing this and really thinking about it, I was thinking, what is that voice of the inner patriarch? And for women, and particularly like the book's for all age groups, but for us in midlife, how does that shape how we view everything that's happened to us, who we are right now, and really importantly for us in this season, what's next? Like, how do we start to unhook and unlearn and reprogram so that we can step into this time of our lives where we really should be, and I never say should, but really all things are lined up for us to be really come into our power as women. So the shoulds and the musts and the have tos are, this tyranny of shoulds. And I can't imagine any women are not going to relate to this. Like, I should do this, I should do this. Like, we should all over ourselves.
I love, that's one of my favorite terms. Stop shooting over yourself. Yep.
Stop shooting all over yourself. And how much of our, something for women to think about listening to this is how much of what you do every day is driven by a should in your head, like a should story. I should go for a walk. I should go to the gym. I should go and do the shopping. I should call Mary. I should do this report for my boss tonight. I should. And it is a tyranny in our minds. So that's a really big part of the inner critic. And then we have the musts and the have tos. And they're similar but nuanced. And women will see that when they read the book. But the musts being these really deeply ingrained beliefs and expectations that are guided in this sense of urgency. I must do this now. And, I think our nervous systems are so frayed by the intensity of the must. I must do it. I must, just goes on and on and on and on, for us as women in our lists. And then the have tos, I have to get to this by a certain age, and I have to, do this for this person. And they all kind of just mold into an endless sea of expectations that stops us and can really limit us as women from doing what we want, having our own vision, living our own purposeful path, and setting boundaries to protect what's most important for us, particularly in this season of our lives we're in, and really creating that on our own terms. Like, finally, midlife, can I really start now to, craft this for myself rather than, taking care of everybody else.
Yeah, beautifully put. And you also write in your book, the impact of the inner critic is profound. It's not just a nagging voice in your head. It doesn't just create self-doubt. It can significantly erode self-esteem, challenge decision-making, and have detrimental impacts on your mental health. Those nagging sensations of never feeling good enough, smart enough, or capable enough. They're really powerful words, and I'm sure women can resonate with that as well. What are some of the voices that you have? What do they say to you?
Yeah, so when we look at the archetypes, my primary archetype is the overachiever. So that and I've been doing this work for a long time now. Like, I know how to tame that, and I've got the tools, as I'm now writing and teaching about. But it's that voice that says, do more, do more, do more. There's more to do. And whether that's through a lens of, just more work in my business, or there's more. One of my big ones is there's more women to serve. Like, there's more women to serve. What else? What else can I be doing? So that's, and I've always been the overachiever. It's had different guises. And as women do this archetype work, they'll understand what I mean by that. And we can turn that inner critic voice into an inner ally. And for me, that shift from letting that overachiever drive and strive to burnout, which is my pattern, Now it's like, well, how do I bring in that? How do I turn that inner critic into inner wisdom and turn that into an inner ally so that I know the questions to ask? So I know, oh, okay, my overachiever archetype is really noisy right now. What do I care about here? Like what's at stake here? Like, why am I driving and all of these things? And one of the best questions for the overachiever archetype is like, what's the minimum viable thing in this situation? What's my minimum viable PhD structure? What's the minimum viable offer? What's the minimum viable time in this thing for my personal life? And then we build from there rather than what overachievers, the perfectionist archetype, and others do is we set the bar here. It's all or nothing. And then it's really hard to come down from there. So one of my personal tools, and I say it to my team all the time, what's the minimum viable pathway or product or option or, whatever it is. So yeah, that's a little bit of a glimpse into my personal one.
Interesting. And as well, you're not just one of these types.
No.
There are when I was reading through, I went, oh, yep, tick that one. Oh, yep, yep, I can see myself in there as well. So we are multiple. Now,
Yeah.
you've got the book in front of you. Can you read us the 13 archetypes and
Yes.
in the words in italics, just so people get an idea of what these
Yes.
various archetypes are. And
I
as
would love
Megan's reading through these, just notice which one, as you're listening to Megan read them, which one that you identify with or which ones you identify with.
Yes. Yeah. And jot them down.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 13 archetypes, the perfectionist, one more time, the fear of failure and judgment, the beauty queen, am I pretty enough? The burden of beauty standards,
Mm.
the skeptic, I'm not smart enough, intellectual self-doubt, the imposter, who am I to do that? The incessant underminer, the people pleaser, I want them to like me, the constant harmonizer, the outsider, I don't belong here, the stranded nomad, the comparer, I'm not there yet, the constant watcher, the good girl, I must do the right thing, the obedient daughter, the overachiever, what's next, the relentless achiever, the self-doubter, I'm not good enough, the chronically inadequate, the chameleon, I can't be me here, the shapeshifter, the empath, I feel everything, the emotional sponge, and the ideal mother, I'm always juggling the good mother identity.
Oof.
I know, right? Does that
And
one land?
you can see yourself also at different ages and stages of life
Yes.
and how they played out.
Yes, it's so true. So when we're not just one,
Mm.
and different seasons can be different archetypes, but what I find for a lot of us as women, we're still holding on to old inner critic stories and old inner critic archetypes that have no relevance for who we are today, but we haven't done that detangling and we haven't unraveled and unlearned
Mm.
that behavior. Like I used to be a people pleaser. I'm not a people pleaser anymore. Like I have, if anyone's a people pleaser and think that you are destined to be one forever, trust me, you can become reformed in people pleasing behaviors. Like I've got that down pat now. But it would be very easy to still have those stories lingering. And the reason the stories are important is because they direct our behavior, they direct our actions. They enable or disenable us from living the life that we want to live and in making the choices that we want to make.
So true. And it's know thyself, isn't it? So when we know ourselves better, well, then we can actually do something about it. That awareness is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. When we really understand ourselves and we have the tools, because I think the tools is such a missing piece.
Mm.
I see this with the women that I teach and coach and support. Because a lot of the time we'll know something, but we don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
No, we don't know how to embody it, or we don't know what's the next right action that we need to take to move through that. So the really understanding this is your next step. Yes, understand this about yourself. Now do this.
Yep.
When this story comes up, do this. So that we've constantly got this, I'm not stuck here. I've got something to do, and
Yep.
that's going to move me out of that stage of just ruminating on my inner critic the way that we all do until we know something better.
Yeah. And those practical tools and solutions are in the book too, which is just fabulous when you read through. So you've got an actionable step to go on with. Now, the final part of your book then, Megan, explores the various tools, again, that we can help us become more self-aware and how to use that inner wisdom that we were talking about earlier. So in this stage of life, we've been through a lot. We've got the battle scars to prove it. But I love how you provide the key questions to ask ourselves throughout. But in particularly in this part of the book, there are some amazing questions in there. And as you say, our life unfolds in the direction of the questions we ask. So what are some key questions that anyone who's listening now
Yeah.
would ask themselves?
So the first question the first and potentially the hardest question that I ask in this book and in all of my work is, what is it that you want for your life? What is it that you want for yourself? And in our Women Rising program, we've had about 10,000 women over the last nearly 4 years go through, and it's the first question I ask. And I would estimate about 95% of women don't know the answer. Which makes sense, right? We're so busy doing all the things, taking care of all of the people that we think it's selfish, or we just don't have the time and energy to focus on ourselves. But without clarity on that question, and particularly in midlife when, kids may have left home, we may have aging parents we're taking care of, we may be in a different career stage, our relationship might be like all of these moving pieces. If we don't take the time as women to really do that inner work, to ask, what do I want for myself in this season? What could it look like? What might I want to reinvigorate? What do I want to let go of? What feels meaningful and purposeful? Like, what's my next career? Then we're just flailing in the wind. And we're also at the whim of everybody else who has an opinion on what our life should look like right now. And that's for all life stages. But something happens in midlife. And I love, Brene Brown said something, I'll paraphrase, midlife, this is the time where we have to wake up and use the gifts we've been given. I think she has an expletive in there. I left that out. But it's like there is no more time to flail around. What do you want for yourself?
Yeah.
And that is if there was only one question you ever asked from all of this work that I write about, that's the question.
And it's a question to ask yourself regularly as well, because that will change.
Yes.
And I think a lot of women get to this age. Well, I know a lot of women get to this age and they've been on that treadmill, and the dreams and the goals that they had were probably set in their 20s or 30s. They're going to be different to the goals and the dreams that you're going to be having in your late 40s and your 50s and beyond.
Yeah.
So
I mean, even early 40s to late 40s.
Oh,
early 50s to mid 50s.
Yeah.
I'll be 55 next year. From when I was 50, it's radically different in terms of the vision that I have for my life and where do I find meaning and what matters, and also now looking at, well, what does my 60s decade look like? And how am I setting that up in my 50s?
Yeah.
Never would have thought I'm having these thoughts at 50, 54. So yeah, and then the second question after that, after what do I want for my life? What do I want my life to look like? That I would love every woman listening to this to ask is, what do I need right now? What do I need? Do I need adventure? Do I need rest? Do I need to go take a bubble bath? Do I need to sleep for, 6 months? Do I need a sabbatical? Do I need a new career because I'm at the top of my mastery curve and I'm ready for my next challenge? And then at a very like sort of simple layer. Do I need to go for a walk every day? Do I need to meditate more? Do I need to sleep more? Do I need, a romantic partner? Like, what do I need right now? Because how often do we ask ourselves that question as women? We're always like, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need? And what do you need? What do you need right now? And it'll be different today and tomorrow. If we asked ourselves that question every day, we would have a different experience of life, I think.
I love that.
Mm.
Agree. Totally agree. Yeah. You're singing my song. A few wrap-up questions now. Early in the book, you wrote, your inner wisdom is your ticket to the life you want to live and the woman you want to be. So what's your answer to that question of the woman that you want to be? Who do you want to be, Megan?
Me, personally,
Mm-hmm.
I always have this, I've always had this thing since my 30s, since my early 30s, that I had a vision of in my early 20s, that I always wanted to be a woman of substance. And I think, there's many women who've said that. Diane von Furstenberg talks about that and always has. And have always looked up to her. I've always wanted to do something substantive in the world, even though that's changed, and something meaningful that matters. I'm a really deeply spiritual person that I don't talk about, publicly, and have very deep practices. And I'm going to India in a couple of weeks on pilgrimage, which I do every year. And it's all linked to my PhD as well. So that sense of connection and just depth, whether it's in my relationships, I have a very small, tight circle, but the people who are in my circle, a lot of them have been there for a very long time. So like deep, like less, less, but deeper. So that theme of substantive, yeah, kind of flows through substantive conversations like this one.
Yeah.
Not, a 15-minute, like I'm an introvert. I hate small talk.
Yeah.
I want substance.
Yes.
The older I get, the more substance I
Well, they're the
want.
only conversations I want to have, really.
I know. Yeah.
What's your number one takeaway message that you would like to leave the listeners today?
Oh, that's such a big question. Figure out what you want for yourself. Like, ask yourself that question. Do that inner work of, what do I want my life to look like? What do I need? Where's meaning for me in my life right now? Yeah. Do that. Focus in on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. And finally, Megan, if you could look into the future, what do you hope 80-year-old Megan will say about current day Megan?
Oh, gee, you asked the good questions. Oh my goodness. That she loved and was loved, and that she left the world a better place, that the world was better in some small way or some big way from my contribution, and that the work that I did in the world was now irrelevant. Like, we don't need to do that anymore because we're living in a free and equal society for all.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your incredible knowledge, your work, and for giving us the gift of the book Women Rising, because it will make a huge impact. And the ripple effect you will never know, but I know what it's done for me. And now that I've been able to share your work with my listeners, I'm just absolutely wrapped. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo. And thank you for your work and for everything that you do to uplift women. You will also never know the ripple effect, but it just makes such a difference every single day. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.